wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last week. Thank you for staying with me. It's been 3 weeks since I've been able to do one of the roundups due to a 2.5-week trip to around the world, frankly, to Vietnam, India, and France, just returning last night. Happy to be back with you today, and we'll be talking through the following 3 questions as we get going today. And as we do each week, we take these questions from our newsletter that comes out on Monday morning Eastern Time, and that is it's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and it's compiled each week on a series of different topics related to international education, to social media, to how we're finding solutions to some of our challenges in international education these days, and goodness knows we have our fair share of those. And those challenges and those news stories that we see popping up in the news, it's our hot takes on Monday in this newsletter form. It's available 2 ways, either in LinkedIn or via email. When you subscribe via either, you can do that on our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and you'll see the 2 options to subscribe to the newsletter, either via submitting a quick form to get us your details for an email, or you can do it via LinkedIn and subscribe that way if that's how you prefer to get your international ed news each week. So happy to be with you today to talk through some of these top topics of the day that we find. We always use the roundup to go more in depth into those major issues of our day that we see popping up in the news stories on Monday. We go next level with them here on Wednesdays, so that we can provide some of the context of how these what's around these stories, and an opportunity to go exploring how we can be adjusting our strategies, our tactics on our campuses around the U.S. to meet the needs of that particular issue that we're tracking with today. So let's get right into our first question, and that first question of the day is, surprise, surprise, why is we talk about social media here? That's part of what we do with the business, SMIE Consulting, social media and international education consulting. That newsletter first topic area is social media and how that's being used in international ed, along with AI topics and all of that. Webinars that are coming up, anything online, digital. And the question is, why is peer-to-peer recruitment essential globally? Now, for those who have been following what we do at SMIE Consulting, you might remember during the pandemic, we started with developing our 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management that was transformed into a book chapter on entry points to U.S. education, and very happy to be part of that outstanding book collection of chapters on international ed topics. But that one of those Ps is peers. Using peers in your recruitment strategy. Not only your current students helping to share their experiences with future students in a variety of different formats, but also alumni, also your parents of current students, particularly for undergraduates, being able to chat with future students and parents who are really engaged in learning more about your institution, making a decision on whether to commit to attend. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the challenges we face with international education, international student recruitment. One of those is the greater majority of international students that come to our campuses each year never visit or never get the opportunity to visit until they actually show up for orientation. And that's a real challenge, obviously, because that means that they're making decisions on whether to attend our institutions sight unseen for only what they can see online, what they can have in conversations either through video or reading chats or participating in chats or watching testimonials that students have given, reading websites, all the kind of content that might be available, taking virtual tours. That's about as close as they can get to actually being on campus. A decision based on what you tell them, what you send them, what they can find out about you online through various sources, not only your own digital platforms that you manage, social media, as well as your website. They have other ways to find out information about you. There are rating sites for institutions. There are Reddit communities. There are all sorts of communities online that can chat, where students can chat about XYZ University and find out any details that they might want that oftentimes you have very little control over. We're now entering the generative AI world where students are relying on AI now more and more, not huge swaths or huge percentages yet, at least as far as the data shows, but certainly a fair number of students that are really taking our traditional sources, even traditional digital sources, out of the equation, and certainly reducing their impact in terms of how they're finding out information about our institutions, and relying on what generative AI gives them, as depending on what students put in for their requirements. Whether they might have a list of institutions, based on this list of institutions, which one might be the best for me, given these strengths and weaknesses that I have, which one's going to help me develop into the best version of myself. That might be a prompt that someone gives. They might get a little bit more granular and not have a list yet, and will say, this is what I'm looking for in a university. Which schools in the United States or around the world even have the kind of programs that are going to be good fit for me in terms of what I'm looking to do academically, and maybe other requirements that you have in terms of a university, many of which they don't know are important, that you might be good at. How do you get on that list? So there's a lot of noise you have to cut through, a lot of uncertainty, frankly, in terms of how students are getting their information about institutions now that is beyond our normal control. And so the question becomes, well, who can really cut through that noise? Who can really share with their future students who might be interested in their institution? Who can best define for prospective students what your campus is actually like, what the student experience really is, what it means to get a degree from your institution, from someone that might look like them, might speak their language, might be in their program. That's something that, unless you have established peer-to-peer recruitment efforts, having a student ambassador corps, having international students as part of your virtual assistants that are virtual chat functions that you might have if you have live events. We all did did virtual fairs during COVID. A lot of us still do virtual events when we can around the world, but how many of us are actually using our current students as part of our recruitment strategy. We try and make them available in terms of video content that we shoot for new students during the orientation program, but we need to generate much, much more, because ideally you want to be able to provide a future student wanting to study a particular major, hopefully someone from their country that can share either live or through video testimonial, through website content, through chat transcripts, whatever it might be able to share their experiences. Because ideally, as much as we like to think we're experts in international student recruitment, we are for our institutions, but we're not living the current student experience. We might be even alumni of the schools we're representing, but that doesn't mean we know what current students are really going through. And that's, for an international student, it matters now more than ever. We saw how important it was post 9/11. We saw how important it was during COVID. It's even now more important when you have administration policies that have really upended how we recruit and where we are able to be successful, and to talk about the climate of what campuses are like. Is it as good as it ever was? Are there issues on campus that make it really difficult given outside pressures? On most college campuses, I would say no, just by general numbers that are out there. There's just a few elite schools that have really been targeted by this administration, that are on the radar, and that will be in the news a lot more than the greater majority of 96% of our institutions that don't ever get the time of day from the federal government, don't have ICE raids, don't have all these other issues going on. But those students that are on our campuses that can talk to the issues of the day that may be of interest to future students to help dispel a lot of the myths that that students in other countries might be hearing about studying in the United States. And students like to generalize. Future students like to generalize because, again, they don't know what they don't know. But if they've heard from one student who has a friend or a brother or sister who studied in the U.S. at a particular school and had a bad experience, that automatically paints all 4,500 of us within that same light, in that future student's perspective. So how do you get over that? And you get over that by having your future students get in touch with your current students in a variety of different methods that they can, either asynchronously or synchronously. Those are the conversations that in the end will convince a student, yay or nay, to come to your institution, if you can provide that. If it's between you and one other school and they have opportunities to chat with current students at one school but not yours, you could potentially lose out to that other school because you've missed an important step in what every student wants to eventually or ideally be able to hear about the schools that they're applying to, that they're making lifelong decisions, impactful decisions, huge financial decisions as to where to attend based on incomplete information when you don't have that peer-to-peer option. And I'll say it up front, we're not ideally suited right now to answer this question. Yes, we do it very well, and we're going to be doing it even better. But I can tell you for sure it's on our to-do list, and it's part of our priority list to frankly develop resources for future students to have opportunities in numerous different ways to connect with our current students, our current international students. We're sharing more content with them on social media through our major channels, but that's not reaching everybody. So how do we make sure we get that content to students when they need it, where they need it? So these are the kind of messaging dilemmas that we're getting into here, and making sure we have the content to be able to deliver in multiple formats, multiple ways, multiple countries, personalizing it as much as we can. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do, certainly at the University of Akron, is get to a point globally where we can have current students be an active part of our team to recruit future students, because ultimately they're our best recruiters, whether we like it or not. That and our successful alumni, which again is a whole other conversation that we all know is also fraught with difficulties in the United States amongst most colleges and universities, just even tracking our international alumni. So again, part of our conversation that we're having at the University of Akron in terms of developing these kind of peer-to-peer recruitment teams to really enhance what we're doing on an institution-wide level. So that's the first question of the day. Certainly there's a link that I dropped into the chat that's for an upcoming IDP and the Ambassador platform. IDP bought out, or acquired, I should say, the Ambassador platform a few years ago, and they're doing a webinar coming up next week, actually next Wednesday, right after this session happens. They'll be having a webinar between IDP and TAP about peer-to-peer, and that's certainly something to get in touch with them, and how they're probably have examples of how their institutions that are using those tools are leveraging that peer-to-peer communication to answer a lot of the questions that current students can answer for future students in a much more cohesive and organized way. So the next question of the day is related to the topic that's been on everybody's lips over the last 2 weeks, and we'll certainly discuss and give our thoughts about it here. And that has to do, what does the 36% reduction in student visas issued last year, 2025, mean for U.S. international educators moving forward in 2026? Well, certainly we saw last fall one of the most damaging falls we've had since that was self-inflicted than that we've ever seen. During COVID, it was obvious the borders were still closed, embassies and consulates were closed, students couldn't get visa appointments, so they weren't able to come to the United States, even if they wanted to. Back in post 9/11 days, we saw students from There was a period right after that happened. It was in September, so most fall intakes had already happened on U.S. college campuses, but there were still a few that were in process. But the world shut down for 3 weeks, and travel to the U.S. was impossible. But even beyond that, for 2 to 3 years, you saw students from Muslim majority countries, male students in particular, that had increased vetting that was going on, what they called administrative processing, that would delay their decisions on visa appointments once they go for their interviews. It would delay decisions for months, and oftentimes with very negative consequences. So the data that came out from last fall's numbers certainly shares what I think most of us already knew. I think the IIE new fall international student surveys, surveying I think it was 600 or so institutions that respond to Open Doors, and we know that there's triple that at least number of institutions in the U.S. that enroll it. So it was never a complete number, but it was a small subset of those that were reporting, and that reported like an 18% decrease in new international student numbers last fall. The actual number based on the survey data that was released by the U.S. Embassy or U.S. State Department was that 36% fewer visas were issued in 2025. What we want to spend some time on is digging into the details of that, and there's a couple sources. Obviously, India is the country that had was most significantly impacted in terms of the volume and the percentage of fewer student visas year on year, 24 to 25. We know 36% is the overall number. 61% fewer Indians received student visas in 2025 as opposed to 24. So that is a massive drop. So the hard numbers are from 97,000 in 2020. The 97,000 number that is getting thrown around, that's the number of F1 visa issued worldwide, and the numbers in India were in 2025. I'm sorry, that 97,000 was worldwide between May and August, the kind of the peak visa season, and then they issued 97,000. 36% drop compared to the same months in 2024. So we do know that India comprised a good percentage of that drop. We've seen certainly the folks on the ground in India, having just spent a week there, had a lot of things to say about that. They have seen very much why that happened last summer in the peak season. We know there was the almost month-long pause and no interviews happening at all in the beginning of the peak season between the end of May and middle of June. We know that social media policy introduction created mountains of extra work for consulates globally. And there wasn't a whole lot of instruction given to consulates on how to implement this, and the decision was made in India, which at the time last summer, India did not have the U.S. ambassador present. We didn't get an ambassador in post until I think it was December, and that meant they were kind of doing their own thing, figuring it out on their own, how they were going to implement this policy without any real leadership from the top in the State Department on this issue. Just do it, and they decided it was going to be done manually. That after each interview that a consular officer did, that was the time that they would then do their social media review of the students' handles that they had submitted on their DS-160 form. And as a result, that meant they weren't able to do the additional visa appointments that traditionally in India they had been doing. They had done super visa Saturdays, and I was reminded when I was there last week that they would even do super visa Sundays some weekends in the summer months. They were adding extra appointments and availability for appointments in the summer months in the previous administration, and going back I think probably 2 or 3 administrations. So it wasn't unusual that in the summer you'd see an increase in the number of appointments available, because that's the peak visa season. That's when they were all going. So the sheer lack of available appointments, coupled with this new policy of what the government was requiring consular officers to review as part of their decision-making process. So it was now not only are you a serious student, how are you going to pay for your studies, and what's your plan when you're done, it's also, have you said anything that's anti-American and pro-terrorist, which is the main distinguishing motivation for requiring the social media vetting, so that students' history of social media would be reviewed for red flags that showcased ties to terrorist organizations or support for Hamas or other terrorist groups. We know the Hamas link is what was the main motivation for the social media reviews of current students in the U.S., and that caused a few students to lose their visas who were already in the U.S., who were actively involved in campus protests and taking on pro-Hamas views. This administration isn't going to tolerate that. They see the student visa as a privilege, not a right, that we do not invite people into the country who we see as threats to our country, who mean us ill will. And meaning us ill will means if you show support for a terrorist organization, then you're not going to be let into the country. And that's our right as a country to decide who gets admitted to our through our borders. And that is obviously in stark contrast to the previous administration that had basically an open border policy. So that was a very significant reaction. Elections have consequences, and this unfortunately is one of those consequences. This new review that includes social media is the tool that's being used by the administration to ensure that those that are getting visas to enter the country legally are still do not mean us any harm. So that is certainly something that we all need to consider, and as we message to future students, this is something that makes us having to tell a very unfortunate story and an unfortunate message to future students that we do not have. It's not open to anyone who wants to come, whether you mean us harm or good. You have to toe a very specific line, and being anti-terrorist is one line that we want you to embrace. Anti-terrorist to the United States, at least. So that message has certainly not gone down well in certain markets. Seeing it, I'm not saying this was the case in India, but certainly seeing what the U.S. has done as a invasion of privacy. There's court cases relevant to that are being heard here, but it's a non-issue until you actually get in the United States, whether the laws of the country apply to you. Certainly the laws that we can impose on who gets into the country, that is a right the government has to decide. Certainly once you're in the country and what protections you have or don't have, that's an issue that is being decided in the courts. But what cannot be argued is that the State Department, embassies and consulates, and then the consular officers who do the visa interviews, and then eventually even the Customs Border Patrol officers that meet with folks as they're entering the country to decide whether they can still come in. They can ask the same kinds of questions that are asked during the visa interview, and probably are being asked the same way, much like students have to answer in a visa interview. But that's the reality for the visa issues right now. Having been in India last week, I can tell you fresh off those meetings with agents, partners, and even some students that had applied. They're concerned not necessarily about the vetting process, but about getting the visa in the first place. And we go back to our advice on making sure, in terms of preparing for those visa interviews, we focus on, hey, don't rehearse all your answers, because that's not what a consular officer is trying to appreciate about you, is how you can memorize an answer, because that's how you're educated in India and most countries around the world. Rote memorization, that's how you learn. You listen to what the professor says, and when the test comes, you throw that information back up on the test and hope you remembered it all right. But that's not what the visa interview is. It's not a test, it's a conversation. and making sure your future students understand it before they go for their appointments and how they prepare for it. More like having a conversation with someone you haven't seen in a while, that they're curious why you're going to the U.S., why you're studying whatever you're going to study, why you're studying where you're going to study, how are you going to pay for that? That's pretty expensive to go to the U.S. How are you going to pay for this? And what are you going to do when you're done? Yeah, you can work. Okay, tell me about it. Why do you want to do that? What's the plan there? So I think there's so much that misinformation about the visa process, and most of our agent partners know this intuitively, that it isn't a test, it's a conversation, and how you prepare for that is also knowing who you're talking to. These are consular officers who, this is what they do every day. They do potentially hours and hours and hours of these most of the day. So are you, when you prepare answers too well, and if a certain number of students from the same agency start going to appointments the same day and they start repeating the same answers, then it sounds rehearsed, it sounds coached, and it sounds like you're being set up. And that's not what they're going to approve. They're going to approve students who are authentic, who can convince that they have a real passion for what they want to do, and they have legitimate funding, and they have a real heavily detailed plan on what, or even lightly detailed plan on what they want to do when they're done. And it's all about education, and there's no doubt that there's fear in the marketplace right now, and there are students in India in particular, the largest single source of students, international students in the U.S., that are thinking twice, that are looking at alternative options. They're looking at the Gulf, maybe not now, but they're looking at Europe especially, places in Southeast Asia where they can go for a couple of years or a year and then transfer to the U.S. That might be part of their equation now, and there's that's not a unique thing just to India, but I certainly think for those countries that have goals of achieving their American dream, whatever version of that they may have, they'll still have the dream. It may be dented, it may be deferred, it may be looking at alternate routes to get there, but that dream's still there. So the 36% reduction, what it really means is we all saw things dropped significantly. The more dependent we were as institutions on India as a major source for our new students, the more we suffered this past fall. Certainly, those institutions that were overly reliant, when they had 35-40% of their international students coming from India, and particularly for graduate programs, they took a big financial hit last year. And you don't rebound from that quickly. Diversification has always been something we talk about, but it's hard to diversify beyond India and China when they are multitude times larger than the next 3 or 4 largest markets out there. Triple or quadruple at least larger in terms of overall volume in the United States. So, but multiple destinations in the top 10 all took hits from 20 to 75% or 79% drops year on year. A lot of that is down to that month-long pause, and a lot of it's down to the implementation of the social media vetting. And that's the social media vetting piece often gets lost in the shuffle just because there wasn't clear guidance on how to do it and implement it efficiently in each country. Some countries are getting a better handle on it. Lower volume country can probably handle that a little easier, but the high volume countries certainly did have considerable challenges this past year. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but clearly the damage has been done, and how long it takes us to recover is a little bit of a larger conversation that we'll see. Will it beat fall 26? Is it going to be better than fall 25? Probably, but marginally at best. The real issue will be, when does the interest pick back up? The interest will pick back up when students see that they're starting to get visas again. We've got our first couple already for the fall. It's still early in the visa season, but we've got getting a couple under our belt, so hopefully giving us some momentum. Is it going to be many of these students, if they're willing to go back a second time, if they're understanding that they didn't articulate well their financials? We know in Nepal that's particularly an issue now, that they've changed. Even after I visited there in end of January, they changed what they were doing in February for reviewing financials. They now want a two-year view of how students are going to pay for their expenses. So that the goalposts seem to be getting moved without a lot of clarity from before they go from the embassy folks. So this is something we'll have to muddle through, and it's unfortunate that a lot of our applicants now are kind of getting caught in the middle here. So we'll hopefully have better news in the weeks and months to come. So there is one final source for this particular topic that I'll share the link to in the chat. It's coming from Karen Fisher's Latitudes column network or newsletter, excuse me, and she digs a little bit deeper into the numbers from the top sending countries that were also saw significant drop-offs last year, and certainly the two biggest culprits in that are going to be, and the reality is that month-long pause at the beginning of the peak of the visa season, and that implementation of the new social media vetting policy. So that's the end of the second question today. The final question of the day is, what should partnerships with Indian universities look like in 2026? Now, we all have heard, if you've been reading the newsletter over the past few months, you know that everybody and their brother is wanting a piece of the Indian student pie outbound for their campuses because other countries smell blood in the water with the U.S. and with other countries. Canada's certainly suffered. Australia's starting to suffer a little bit in terms of caps and in terms of higher fees and making it a much more difficult proposition to go to those countries. All the big four are taking hits and have done so with India. UK might be the best of the four, and that's not saying a whole lot in terms of what the future might look for this fall for outbound Indian students. But the kind of the other side of the coin, not necessarily inbound students to India, which I know the government has set aside, has given institutions the ability to set aside up to 25% of the institutional places for students each year to international students. I don't think anybody's actually hit that number yet. They can add capacity if they can obviously add capacity domestically as well, but they're giving them the freedom to add up to 25% of the seats that they offer each year to international students. Whether that actually happens or not is when that actually happens for a lot of institutions, we'll wait and see. Procedurally, it's not the most convenient place to bureaucratically to get in. Once you're there, the facilities that many institutions have small amounts of housing for international students and potentially domestic students from far-flung parts of the country, and certainly those do exist in India. But the reality is, when it comes to partnerships, I'll step aside from the inbound and outbound argument right now, but talking about what partnerships need to look like in India, that's a different conversation. And I think Fanta, who many of you know, president of our CEO of NAFSA, CEO/executive director of NAFSA, she has made many statements every chance I've had to hear her speak or heard articles about where she's quoted or after she's given a speech at a particular event. I was at an event this week in France for global university systems. As many of you know, University of Akron is now is working with uni, which is a subsidiary of Global University Systems. Global University Systems has an annual conference last 3 or 4 years in Cannes, France, meant to bring their member institutions together. There are 33 institutions that are part of the GUST network, and then they have opportunities to meet with each other, meet with other invited partners. We were one of those, had the opportunity to have our president and our chief strategy officer attend with me, so I could introduce them to some of these key players that we need to establish partnerships with, one of which is in India. But at the event, Fanta was there, someone I've known for many years now, and 20 years probably. She was asked to give an opening speech at the gala dinner we had the first night, and she made the point, and she's made it every time I've heard her talk recently, going back to NAFSA last year, how partnerships in this new modern world are no longer just no longer should be or modeled where it's the global north taking from the global south, and students, faculty, whatever it might be, that there needs to be mutually beneficial agreements, two-way flows of research, of faculty, of students, different kinds of joint programs. There needs to be mutually beneficial relationships. In the past, that has meant mutually beneficial to the U.S. university that's interacting, using these relationships to bring students in, or research, whatever it might be. But here, she makes the claim, and I certainly am becoming a proponent of this as well, in terms of when we approach new potential partners, we have to do so from a mutually beneficial starting point. That this doesn't work. Otherwise, it's just another paper MOU that thousands of universities sign and never do anything with. We don't want that. We want our partnerships to be relevant, to be mutually beneficial, to be two-way streets, to be certainly recognizing the needs of the individual country and institutions within those countries that we're trying to establish partnerships with, that what we do with you, it needs to be together. We need to approach things where we're doing joint programs, where we're co-creating curriculum in some cases, co-creating research objectives. All of that needs to be done together, and that's certainly what partnerships should be in an ideal world, and certainly what I think in India in particular. There are still some that are just looking for pathways, 2+2s, grad pipelines, whatever it might be, but more and more institutions are going to be looking for those T&E options, because where they can be a host for international students that might be attracted to programs that they're offering jointly with you in country, and being able to have this campus model. This is one of the big conversations we were having with partners when I was there in India, and meeting with one of those partners from the GUS network at the conference in Cannes. So those are the mutually beneficial partnerships that we all need to be pursuing, and certainly I'm thinking that has to be a guiding principle for every future partnership we look at, unless an institution comes to us with the goal of, hey, we want to send you students because we want to be affiliated with a school with a better reputation than ours. That's great. Happy to accommodate, but ideally we want new partners. We want to be able to offer them something that's going to be beneficial to them as well. So that's what I think we all want to get to. It's not an ideal world yet, no, far from it, but certainly as we approach things, and when we still have choice in the matter on who we partner with, when we're intentional about being co-creators, about working together to create mutually beneficial arrangements, that's when I think you get into the best case scenarios for what institutional partnerships can and should be. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. Looking forward to chatting with you again in the next couple of weeks before we head out again in the middle of April. So thanks again for being a part, and we'll chat with you next time. Cheers.